My name is Luca Tiano. I'm a professor in biochemistry at the Polytechnic University of Marche in Italy, where I teach Nutrigenetic and Nutrigenomic. My research interest, my wider research interests are in nutrition and health. Today I will give you some information on folates, specifically on Quatrefolic, the so-called fourth generation of folates. In particular, we will discuss subject-specific differences in the metabolization and use of folate. And we'll start to talk about the market, why folate have a very large market. Folate, together with other B-complex vitamins, are essential for the maintenance of cellular function and health, and in particular, folate play a key role in the biosynthesis of vital elements such as DNA, lipids, proteins, and neurotransmitters. Alteration in this pathway leads to severe cellular impairment and constitute a risk factor for the development of multiple life-threatening diseases. In other words, folates are ubiquitous essential vitamins that play an essential role as cofactors in biosynthetic processes and as such are important in pregnancy, but also in several other stages of life. In fact, products containing folate are numerous worldwide, and in particular the market share on supplements for women is rapidly growing to a remarkable rate. While folate deficiency is recognized and it's a frequent condition, as we will discuss, because notably not all subjects may benefit from standard folic acid supplementation, which is a form that is highly stable, but synthetic, highly stable, but in this form needs to be activated, and subject-specific differences may play a role in this process. Subjects with specific requirements in activation represent a growing sector of the market. So let's start by discussing in more detail the different forms of folate available for human consumption. In particular, what are the nutritional sources of folates? Are they sufficient, always sufficient in the diet? And what are the limitations associated with dietary folates? Folates are present in different vegetable sources. Here in this slide there are some examples of, for example, greeny leafy vegetables such as broccoli and other brassicacee, fruit such as avocado, papaya, oranges, legumes, nuts. So food that is actually frequent, relatively frequent in the diet in the different forms. However, there are limitations associated with the intake of folate in vegetables that is associated to the variability of the content of folate depending on the cultivar, on the season, and more importantly, due to storage and cooking of veggies that might decrease the folate content up to 70 or even 95%. For this reason, dietary intake on average is generally referred as inadequate for organism requirement. This situation can be further worsened in condition of increased requirement. They can be either for natural causes, such as during pregnancy or other critical biosynthetic life phases, or can be a consequence of drug interactions, such as the use of drugs that are generally referred as folate antagonists, like aminopterin, methotrexate, and they may lead to folate deficiency. Moreover, besides limited dietary intake, deficiency can be further worsened when there are issues with our ability to absorb or activate folate. In terms of absorption, this is normally impaired absorption can be associated with pathological dysfunction of the gastrointestinal tract that has a systemic consequence, whereas activation of folate that we will discuss in more detail, it might depend on specific gene variants relatively frequent in the healthy general population. In relation to the concept of folate activation and talking about different dietary forms, it is important to pay attention to the difference between natural folates, the one present in dietary source that we just discussed, that are a family of natural, structurally related compounds present in vegetables mainly, and folic acid, which is a synthetic compound that was first synthesized in 1945, which is a stable, quite cheap form, and therefore widely used in supplements and fortified food. Nonetheless, as we will discuss, not all the subjects are able to benefit in the same level from this integration, because folic acid needs to be activated in order to be used by the organism, and not all the subjects are equipped with the optimal set of tools to allow a complete activation of the molecule. In fact, even dietary folate have to proceed some metabolization and activation steps, even though less than with a synthetic folic acid, in order to be transformed to the biologically active form of folate that in our body is the 6S5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. As we can see in this diagram, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is the main folate form in the mother and also in cord blood in newborns, ranging from 80 to 90% of the total folate content. And using this gestational example that represent a critical life stage when folate are essential for the development of the fetus, we can see that the concentration of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate is double in the cord serum compared to the mother serum, highlighting the extremely high bioavailability of this form. In summary, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, the active molecule in Quatrefolic, is the bioactive form of folate, readily available for transport and use in the human body, meaning that it can be directly used, while dietary folate, mainly present as dihydrofolate, and even more the synthetic folate as folic acid that we discussed, needs to be converted and activated. A key activator enzyme in this process is methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, which is an enzyme that catalyzes the last activation step of folate. Methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase does not come in a single form, but within human variability, there are different forms might be present and actually relatively frequent. These variants show different degrees of activities and are normally referred as polymorphism. So what does actually mean a polymorphism? A polymorphism is a variant in the DNA sequence that characterizes each single individual. In this respect, generally speaking, DNA in humans is quite conserved. If we consider that 99% of our DNA sequence are identical to those of higher primates, such as chimpanzee monkeys. On the other hand, even subtle variation may have macroscopic effect. Again, only 0.5% variation differentiate human DNA from close primates, and the same percentage is responsible for the huge variability that characterize the human beings. Considering that the DNA is composed by 3 billion elements, these building blocks also known as nucleotides, 0.5% accounts for approximately 15 million nucleotides that differentiate each single individual, so not such a little difference after all. Nucleotides come in 4 types, and their sequence constitutes the genetic code, just like musical notes compose a melody. In our DNA is written our personal melody of life, to use this metaphor, that is pretty similar for each one of us, with the exception of scattered single notes, a number that is approximately, as we said, 0.5% of all notes, that represent the variance. This variation might sound like personal glimpse of interpretation, and actually from time to time they can even sound better than the original script. Very often they do not have any particular effect, but sometimes they may be clearly out of tune, making our love melody not so good at times. Getting back to today's topic, we say that folate do not come in our diet ready to use, but they need to be processed by the organism. The gene encoding for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, the enzyme necessary for the activation of folate and folic acid, might be present in two common variants, the 677 CT and a 1298 AC, where the denomination indicates the position and the substitution of nucleotide on the gene. Different combination of these two variants result in the expression of low functionality enzymes with activities that may be as low as 25% of the wild type form. These variants are very frequent, meaning that less than half of the people have a standard, fully functioning version of the gene, while about 60% of the people have at least one copy of the low-function variant. So, going back to our musical examples, the carriers in their life memory of this variant will have some notes representative of the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase gene slightly out of tune. More specifically, alteration of one nucleotide, cytosine for thymine and adenine for cytosine, in these two common variants result in the alteration of the codon triplet and leads to a one amino acidic substitution in the protein. The presence of a single amino acid results in a still functional but less active protein. In fact, if a single copy of the gene is altered, so we have a heterozygous CT variant, for example, for the 677 CT, its activity is decreased by 30%, while in homozygosity, the TT variant activity is decreased by 70%. Combining the different possibilities, taking into account the two variants, we could have up to 9 patterns of expression with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, gestational and neurological issues. Variants at high risk were originally studied in the US population, highlighting a higher proportion in Hispanic and Caucasian compared to Afro-Americans carrying this variant. However, further studies were conducted in different cohorts across the world, highlighting a significant prevalence in many other ethnic groups, and in particular in Italy, in China, in Korea, in Mexico, with prevalence that were up to 30 or 40% or even more. In any case, the prevalence is rather high globally, and we are talking only of one variant of the 677 CT. So considering the pattern resulting from different variants, the situation could only be worse. The use of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate present in Quatrefolic avoid any limitation associated with less active gene variants of the enzyme required for folate activation. Not only the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, but also the hydrofolate reductase, which is another enzyme that is located upstream in the conversion pathway and is particularly important in the transformation of the synthetic folic acid. Which is, as we said, the most common form of integration of folate in supplements and fortified food. This is particularly critical because an overdosage of folic acid and or a suboptimal transformation may lead to an accumulation of unmetabolized folic acid that has been shown to be associated with relevant health concerns. The use of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate completely bypass also this issue, unregarding of the genetic background of the receiver. Quatrefolic is structurally analogous to the reduced and active form of folate and does not need any processing. In conclusion, folate deficiency is one of the most common vitamin deficiency, and simply eating folate-rich food may not provide the recommended daily dosage for several reasons, including altered absorption, disease state, and interference with drugs. In between these well-known factors, deficiency associated to specific genetic background represent a growing area of research that are attracting a lot of interest in the scientific community for its relevant epidemiological size and broad negative consequence for human health. Moving into biological function of folate and consequence of deficiency, and of course the beneficial effect of integration, we mentioned that folate together with other B vitamin complex are essential for the maintenance of cellular function and health. In particular, folate play a key role as donor of methyl moieties to endogenous biomolecules in a process that is also known as one-carbon metabolism. Doing so, folate is essential to vital biosynthetic processes. Alteration in this pathway leads to cellular impairment associated with increased risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, critical organ failure that are also associated with different degenerative diseases. In this view, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase is crucial both to promote folate bioavailability and subsequently to the methylation of multiple biomolecules. In fact, the list of scientific evidence that link methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase polymorphism with different pathological conditions is very broad and not limited to pregnancy. Risk factors associated with the polymorphism is under the spotlight of researchers, and the list of conditions associated with this variant is constantly updated and growing. Finally, let me provide you some more information about the specific advantages of Quatrefolic formula. Quatrefolic is the glucosamine salt of 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, and as such represent the last generation of folate and embeds several innovative advantages over traditional folic acid supplementation. As we mentioned, it is a natural product, bioidentical to the essential form in which folates occur in the human body. In this form, it does not need further processing and is already active and readily available and is able to go across the blood-brain barrier. Moreover, in the form of glucosamine salt, its solubility is greatly increased, being 100 times greater and consequently more bioavailable, as shown in this acute test, where the plasma levels were measured for 8 hours after a single ingestion, and we can see that Cmax, the maximum concentration reached in the plasma of the glucosamine salt, is remarkably higher compared to the folic acid, as well as methyl tetrahydrofolate as calcium salt. Following its broad spectrum of activity, being involved in very basic and essential biosynthetic processes, application areas are very heterogeneous, ranging from cardiovascular condition, neurological and mood disorders, and also fertility and gestational issues. So wider aspects of pregnancy in this context surely represent a major application area. We mentioned that folates are critical for biosynthesis of cellular components through the one-carbon metabolism. And DNA synthesis is certainly required for the first phases of fetal development to ensure chromosome stability and proper gene expression. Moreover, impairment of one-carbon metabolism promotes hyperhomocysteinemia, which is a risk factor for embryo loss. Indeed, deficiency of folate is known to be causally related to neural tube defects and other fetus developmental issues. As a direct consequence, folate requirements increase massively during pregnancy. But even before pregnancy, folate levels are directly associated in general with fertility rate, both in men and in women, raising again the issues of low activity of methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase polymorphism associated also with fertility issues. In men, low levels of folate are associated with poor sperm count and spermatic DNA instability. In women, it can affect epigenetic factors associated with oocyte maturation, but is also related to several gynecological conditions that, beyond fertility, represent also serious health risk factors. Taken together, these aspects highlight that folate are critical in women's health. In this respect, Quatrefolic has been tested in a clinical trial involving 33 couples with at least one partner with methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase polymorphism with an history of infertility, so premature fetal loss, miscarriages, and these couples had previously used high doses of folic acid, up to 5 milligrams per day, but without any success. When the couples were given Quatrefolic 800 micrograms only per day, the pregnancy rate increased to 87%, either spontaneous or maximizing the effect of the in vitro fertilization embryo transfer. Another area of intervention that is worth mentioning is the cardiovascular health in relation to the involvement of folates in recycling homocysteine, which is a byproduct of methionine metabolism that may have negative impact on health when present at high levels. In particular, plasma levels should be less than 10 micromoles per liter. When hyperhomocysteinemic subjects were given either 5 milligrams of folic acid or 400 micrograms of methyl tetrahydrofolate, both in association with B-complex vitamins, this led to a significant reduction of homocysteine plasma levels that was more pronounced in subjects on Quatrefolic, where 56% of the recorded measures were below the safety level of 10 micromoles per liter. So with this I concluded my technical presentation. I hope you had a clear overview.